Hey guys, welcome to chapter 6. If you remember from chapters 4 and 5, we talked about carbohydrates and fats. Um, so now we're going to talk about proteins, um, the last calorie containing macronutrient. So, some different sources of protein. You can get protein from either animal or plant sources. Animal sources include meat, eggs, and dairy products. While these are great sources of protein, they can also be high in saturated fat and cholesterol. But though they provide B vitamins and other absorbable minerals, plant sources of protein include grains, nuts, and legumes. Unlike animal fats, unlike animal protein, plant protein is low in saturated fat and cholesterol, high in fiber, phytochemicals, and unsaturated fat. Legumes are great sources of plant proteins. They're the starchy plant seeds produced by bean pods, including peas, peanuts, beans, soybeans, and lentils. Now, just a quick look at some different sources of protein and about how much protein they provide. So, 1 cup of milk contains about 8 grams of protein. 1 egg contains about 7 grams of protein, and 3 ounces of meat contain over 20 grams of protein. Now, to give you an idea, 3 ounces of meat is what is considered a serving size for meat. And 3 ounces is about the size of a deck of cards. So that's something that a lot of nutritionists will use as sort of a visualization when you're preparing meat for yourself or eating out at a restaurant, that a single serving is considered about the size of a deck of cards. And that size, that deck of card size, has over 20 grams of protein. I'm sure if you can think about the last time you went out to eat and maybe ordered some steak or some chicken, think about the size of that portion. And I imagine that it's far, far larger than a deck of cards. Now, some plant sources of protein. 1 slice of bread has about 2 grams of protein. If you remember back from chapter 4, where we talked about whole grain versus refined grain flour, obviously the type of bread and whether or not it's whole grain is going to change the amount of protein in that product. A 1/2 cup of legumes. These are those beans or peas that we just talked about. A 1/2 cup contains 6 to 10 grams of protein. And a 1/2 cup of rice, pasta, or cereal contains 2 to 3 grams of protein. And a 1/2 cup of nuts or seeds contains 5 to 10 grams of protein. Amino acids. Now, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. We're going to talk about these quite a bit this chapter. On the bottom of the slide is an example of an amino acid. It's made up of carbon, hydrogen, an amino group which contains nitrogen, and also an acid group and side chain. There are a whole list of different amino acids that you'll see later this chapter. There are 20 in total. Some are essential, some are non-essential, and they're each characterized by a different side chain, which is that blob at the bottom in green. All amino acids will have the acid group, hydrogen group, carbon, and amino group, but that side chain, that green cluster of boxes, is going to be different depending on the amino acid that you're talking about. Probably the most unique characteristic of amino acids are that they contain nitrogen. If you remember back to talking about different types of lipids, whether those are sterile, saturated, unsaturated, they did contain an acid group, hydrogen, carbons, but no nitrogen. And the same thing with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates do not contain nitrogen, and nitrogen is a really important element in your body. We'll talk about nitrogen later this chapter and why it's so important. But it's important to remember that proteins are the only macronutrient that contain nitrogen. So in order for your body to get the nitrogen that it needs, you need to get that from the protein that you consume. Just a quick quiz. I think there's several of these throughout this chapter that I put in here just to kind of test your knowledge and get you thinking about these concepts in a way that you'll likely see them on your midterm. So match the building blocks with the nutrient. So we've talked about carbohydrates, we've talked about triglycerides, and we've talked about proteins. Now on the right are the different building blocks, the smallest unit of each of those macronutrients. So I'll just give you guys a second to think about which of the building blocks on the right match up to the macronutrient on the left. All right, so first one, complex carbohydrates, can be broken down into monosaccharide units. So that's C, monosaccharides. If you remember, that's like glucose, galactose, all those single sugar units. That's what your digestive system works to break them down into. Next, triglycerides. The answer to that is B. Triglycerides are made up of fatty acid side chains and that glycerol backbone. So last, proteins, we just talked about this. The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. Amino acids linked together to form larger proteins. So in this picture, each of the, you can see each of the individual amino acids. There's a series of the three circles there, the hydrogen, the amino group, and the acid group, and they are linked together with peptide bonds. So in this chain at the top, we're seeing 4 different amino acids. They are then bonded together with those little red segments. Those are peptide bonds. And then once many of those amino acids are linked together, they form what's known as a polypeptide chain, which is all the way at the bottom. It kind of just looks like a knotted mess. You'll see other visual depictions of proteins later on this chapter, but where we talked about lipids last week and talked about how they can be really straight and rigid or kind of jagged and bent. Proteins look totally different because they just form these big, twisted, knotted masses. So, their structure just looks completely different than either carbohydrates or fats, but you'll see that more as we go through the chapter. Amino acids link to form proteins. The example here is kind of just showing you what it's like when we talk about amino acids being building blocks. We obtain amino acids from eating both plant and animal foods, and our bodies resemble the amino acid building blocks into our body proteins. So in this example on the bottom, there's this little tree and then this little turkey made up of like Legos. And so in this example, if you were to eat, some of the tree or plant or whatever it is, and then eat the turkey, it's showing you that the individual building blocks that the tree and the turkey are made out of will get broken down, and you will consume each of those individual building blocks, which will then be used to build muscle tissue and other structures within your body. Essential versus non-essential amino acids. So when we've talked about other nutrients already, we've talked about things that are essential versus non-essential. So, little review of these definitions. Something that's essential cannot be made in the body, so it's essential that we consume them. For example, if one is missing, body proteins are broken down to make new proteins. So if there is an amino acid that's essential and you haven't been consuming enough of it, your body will actually go to its own muscle tissue and start breaking it down in order to generate the protein that you're not getting enough of. Then we have non-essential. Non-essential amino acids are those that the body can make on its own from other proteins, so it isn't essential to eat them, though certainly you can still obtain it from the food that you consume. And here's a list of essential versus non-essential amino acids. We have essential on the left and non-essential on the right. You'll notice some of the non-essential amino acids are starred. These are considered conditionally essential, so sometimes for some people they have to consume them from their diet, and for others they don't need to. But for the purposes of this lecture, we're going to consider them non-essential. Now, you don't need to worry about memorizing these lists. It's just important to know that there are 20 total amino acids. Some of them are essential, some of them are non-essential. What does that mean to be essential or non-essential? And that regardless of the amino acid, they all have that hydrogen acid group, amino group, and then they differ in side chain. Okay? Now, seeing the slide always kind of brings me back to when I was in college. I took biochemistry, and for our exam, we had to memorize the chemical structure of every single one of these amino acids. I don't know that I could draw them all for you now, but if any of you are thinking about going into a science career or maybe nursing or something like that, and you take biochemistry, that might be something that they ask you to do. So no worries, no worries. We're not going to have to do that in this class, and you're not going to have to memorize the list. But just to give you an idea of some of the other classes that kind of dive deeper into this. So this is an example of what a scientist sees. So in this example, they use Diet Coke, and Diet Coke contains phenylalanine, and phenylalanine is a protein. Well, it's an amino acid. And when dietary protein and aspartame are added together with phenylalanine under normal metabolism, it would become tyrosine. However, with the presence of aspartame, the normal metabolism reaction is blocked, leading to phenylketonuria and phenylketones, which are actually toxic to the brain. So, again, this isn't anything that you're going to have to memorize, but when we think about individual amino acids and how they react with other chemicals in our food and in the environment, compounds that would ordinarily be harmless can sometimes actually be toxic to our bodies. Protein folding. Amino acids interact to form the three-dimensional structures of proteins. This is what we were talking about earlier when it kind of showed the polypeptide as one big knotted ball. Structures of proteins determine their functions. If the protein structure is changed, then the protein function may change as well. So in this example, it's just showing it with little 2D shapes, showing how they form a chain, and then that chain is kind of bound up. So if the protein structure is changed, it might not be able to carry out the same function that it was intended for. So this is when you kind of get into talking about mutations and genetic variation, and where you have a protein that maybe is supposed to, let's see, if you have a group of proteins that are supposed to make up some muscle tissue in your legs, and they're supposed to allow your body to move in a certain way. If the structure of that protein were to change or had an abnormality of some kind, it could cause your legs to not work properly. And this is another visual interpretation of the folding of a protein. And so in this picture, this would be considered a protein, and it would be made up of many, many, many amino acids. And you can just see how there are some little spirals, some little corkscrews, other like zigzags and bends, and all kinds of different ways that it's all folded up and wound up together. Protein denaturation. Denaturation is a change in a protein's three-dimensional shape, and it can occur for a variety of reasons. Either heat from cooking or a fever, so you could denature protein in a food by cooking it, or proteins in your body could be denatured because you have a fever and your body temperature increases. Proteins can also be denatured by low pH in the stomach or when the body becomes acidic, for example, in diabetic ketoacidosis. And also because of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, mad cow disease, and Parkinson's disease. Here we are. Here's some protein denaturation at work in the real world. So in this example, the person's just cracking an egg into the frying pan. And when that egg white starts to cook and turns white, that clear, what would normally be clear liquid, turns into a white solid. Because of the heat, that's an example of protein denaturation. And so this slide covers protein digestion. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because we did cover all of this in chapter 2 when we talked about digestion, but it's really just highlighting the individual sites in your digestive system where different parts of protein digestion take place. So it starts in the mouth with chewing. Again, we know that the only enzyme in the mouth that works on digestion is salivary amylase that works to digest carbohydrates. So without chemical digestion in the mouth, the only type of digestion that occurs for proteins is mechanical digestion from chewing. Then once proteins reach the stomach, hydrochloric acid and the enzyme pepsin begins the chemical digestion of protein. Moving on to the small intestine, protein digesting enzymes secreted from the pancreas along with those in the microvilli break down polypeptides into individual amino acids. And these individual amino acid building blocks are what are absorbed across the microvilli into the blood vessels, and that's what the inset picture is over on the right. Protein digestion is relatively efficient in that there's very little dietary protein lost in the feces. Often if you are going to the doctor and they're checking to see if you have an injury or an infection or something wrong, they'll take a urine sample or take a stool sample and check it to see if there is a high protein concentration. In a healthy human with normal metabolism, there shouldn't be any protein present. So if there is, that can often signify an issue. Another question to kind of check your understanding in protein digestion. So the picture here at the right is showing you, from the last slide, showing you amino acids being absorbed across the microvilli. In this example, there are three different colors of amino acids. We have purple, green, and blue. So the purple amino acids are absorbed by the same transport system as the green amino acids. If you were to consume a sports drink that's supplemented with the green amino acids, what will happen to the absorption of the purple ones? Okay, so we're talking more about this little active transport mechanism over here on the left. Both purple and green are able to flow through this cycle into the microvilli, into your blood vessel. And purple and green in this example both fit into the same slots. So if you were to drink or consume something that contained a lot of those green amino acids, what would happen to the absorption of the purple ones? So I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. All right, so the answer is B. The larger amount of green ones will limit the absorption of the purple ones. So if you only have so many sites where amino acids can bind to, then sometimes consuming too much of a single amino acid can block other amino acids from being absorbed, thus leading to a nutrient deficiency, even if you're consuming that nutrient. Amino acid pool. Your amino acid pool are the amino acids available for use in the body. They come from the diet or from breakdown of body proteins. The amino acids in the pool are used to make other proteins or chemicals, for example, DNA, RNA, histamine, etc., and also used to provide energy or be converted to make glucose or fatty acids. And so this is just kind of showing you what we mean when we talk about amino acid pool. So on the left, we have dietary proteins. These are the protein sources that you're eating. And then on the right, we have your body proteins. So this might be muscle tissue or another protein in your body. So the dietary proteins on the left, when they are digested, each of the little building blocks, each of the little amino acids is broken down individually and added to an amino acid pool. Same thing with your body proteins. If those are broken down into the individual amino acids, those are all added to the amino acid pool. So then in that pool, you have all these building blocks, some from your body, some from the food that you ate. The amino acids in that pool could then be linked together with peptide bonds to create more body proteins. So body proteins being broken down and then recycled to build new body proteins, or the amino acids could be used for energy, so for just their calorie content. They could be used for the synthesis of glucose or fatty acids, or the synthesis of non-protein molecules that contain nitrogen. So 2 good points here. One, amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, can be used to create glucose or fatty acids if your body is deficient in either. And also the synthesis of non-protein molecules that contain nitrogen. This is also important again because proteins are the only macronutrient source of nitrogen for the body. Genes contain instructions for proteins. Each gene contains the instructions for one RNA molecule. RNA is transcribed or rewritten from DNA. Messenger RNA, or mRNA, molecules exit the nucleus and contain instructions for the order of amino acids in a protein. The nucleotide instructions in DNA and RNA are translated to the amino acid language of proteins. So in this example, we have the amino acid pool on the left, and then an example of the protein that's created on the right. So if this specific protein, you'll see that there are 6 of the A amino acids in the protein on the right. If for some reason there's a shortage of that particular amino acid A, whether it's not available in your body or you haven't been consuming enough of it, that then limits the body's ability to synthesize the protein on the right. because without that one building block, the protein can't be properly constructed. Gene mutations. Changes in gene sequence can change the sequence of the amino acids in a protein. Changes in amino acid sequence can change how a protein folds and change its structure. And then changes in a protein structure can change protein function. So you'll see when we go from the gene itself to the amino acid to the larger protein, there's so many steps along the way, and at each step is the opportunity for a mutation to occur. Gene regulation. All cells contain the same DNA. During development, some genes are turned on and others are turned off so cells can carry out specific functions. For example, insulin-producing cells turn on the insulin gene and turn off muscle contraction genes. Chemicals can also turn genes on and off. For example, high iron turns on the ferritin gene to make more ferritin, which is needed for iron storage. All right, another quick concept check. Hopefully you'll get this one right. We've gone over this quite a bit. The building blocks of proteins are A, B, C, or D. All right, we did just talk about DNA and RNA, but the building blocks of proteins are still amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Where we just talked about DNA and RNA, what DNA and RNA are the instructions for how amino acids link together to form proteins. But amino acids are still the building blocks, so don't be confused by that. Protein functions. Lots of different functions in the body for proteins. They work to speed up chemical reactions, work to form structures, transmit some chemical signals, for example, hormones. They play a role in the transportation of substances, movement of muscles, your body's immunity, for example, antibodies are protein. Also blood clotting and fluid balance. So showing just some different visual depictions of protein functions. The muscle tissue around your kneecap on the left. Up on the right, there's a blown up picture of your red blood cells, and then on the bottom showing an enzyme and the role that the enzyme plays in breaking down other molecules. All of these are proteins and all very, very important to the proper functioning of your body. Using proteins. Amino acids from the diet are used to make proteins and nitrogen-containing molecules. Extra amino acids cannot be stored, and extra amino acids are used for energy or stored as fat. So, I thought I just said they couldn't be stored. If you take in extra amino acids that your body doesn't need, your body doesn't store amino acids in the amino acid pool. When amino acids go into that pool, they have to be used quickly for something, and if they're not used, they just get used. If they're not used to build something for your body, then they're just used for calories or stored as fatty tissue. So they are stored, just not in their amino acid state. Using proteins for energy. When we do not consume enough calories to meet needs, body proteins are broken down since amino acids are not stored. So if somebody isn't getting enough protein, their body will actually kind of start to eat away at itself and eat away at its muscles in order to supply amino acids to that pool. Excuse me. Deamination is the name of the process where the amino group, that NH2, is removed from the amino acid. This produces urea, which is excreted in the urine. So once that NH2 group is taken off the amino acid, all that's left is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen can then be broken down to produce ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. I think we mentioned that in an earlier slide, but ATP is just, the acronym that we use, and it basically denotes energy for a cell. So it can be broken down to produce energy or used to make glucose or fatty acids. And this is the cycle through which amino acids can be converted into ATP. Again, you're not going to have to memorize this. I had to, and it's kind of torture, but just interesting to think about, that the pink kind of circular area, right? This kind of pink bean shape here, where all of these different processes are taking place. This is a mitochondrion. So a mitochondrion is an organelle within a single cell. So this is just one little tiny piece of a cell. And all of these processes are going on all the time in your body to make sure that proteins are broken down, the correct outputs are being produced, energy, glucose, fatty acids. It's pretty amazing when you think about just how small all of this really is, and how many millions of sites in your body this is taking place. Pretty neat. Protein energy malnutrition. This refers to the loss of fat and muscle and decreased immunity from long-term protein and calorie deficiencies. There are two different types, kwashiorkor and marasmus. You will need to know both of these. Kwashiorkor is a pure protein deficiency, whereas marasmus is an overall energy deficiency. So kwashiorkor, you are deficient in protein only, and in marasmus, you don't get enough calories in total. And these are some pictures of some children that are experiencing protein energy malnutrition. And the map is just showing the population of different nations that are considered undernourished. So you can see much of the undernourished populations exist in sort of equatorial regions, whether that's in South or Central America, Africa, or Southeast Asia. So if you have excess protein, we talked about the deamination process and how that amino group is removed and then excreted as urea. So if you take in too much protein, you're going to have an increased urea output. Now you might think, oh, well, I just pee it out, it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal because increased urea increases demands on the kidneys, increases loss of water from the body, possibly increases the loss of calcium, weakening your bones, and gives you an increased risk of kidney stones. High protein diets are typically high in animal proteins, making them also high in saturated fat and cholesterol and low in fiber. They're also typically low in grains, fruits, and vegetables, and high in calories and total fat. With high protein diets, you also get increased risk of heart disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes. Protein allergies. So this is actually what an allergy is. People can have intolerances or sensitivities, but a true allergy is a reaction to a protein in a specific food. So when a protein is absorbed intact, your immune system can recognize it as an antigen and start cellular reactions. So the first time you consume a food that you're allergic to, nothing's actually going to happen. Your body will just recognize it and kind of create a little reminder for itself so that the next time it comes in, you'll actually have the allergic reaction. So it's the second time that your second exposure when you'll actually have an allergic reaction to something. So that second time the immune system detects that same allergen and there is an allergic reaction. Major food allergens include milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, soy, and wheat. These are also often listed on nutrition facts labels to alert people with allergies that there's the potential that that product contains one or more of these food allergens, or maybe was processed on the same equipment as one of these allergens. Because food allergies can be so severe, it's important for people to be informed about the components of their foods. Taking a look at nutrition labels where protein is, you see in this example of a canned chicken and rice soup, it has 7 grams of protein highlighted towards the bottom of the nutrition facts label. And then some examples of proteins in the ingredients labels are highlighted. Obviously in the ingredients label, it's not just going to say protein. So you would have different words like chicken broth, chicken meat, there is isolated soy protein, MSG, monosodium glutamate, that's a protein, hydrolyzed corn protein. So all different names and terms that you would see in an ingredients label. So food sensitivities. Food sensitivities do not involve the immune system. It triggers various symptoms after consumptions. Some examples. I hadn't heard of this until this class, but some folks suffer from an MSG symptom complex, which can also be called Chinese restaurant syndrome, because a lot of Asian food restaurants use MSG in their preparation of food. For some folks, they are sensitive to MSG in food, not necessarily allergic, but if you go to an Asian restaurant, if you look on the menu, a lot of times it'll say our food is not prepared with MSG, or dishes, like a customer can suggest that food be prepared without MSG. So, certainly restaurants recognize that a lot of people have that sensitivity and really work to accommodate that. Another example of a food sensitivity is gluten intolerance or celiac disease. This has gotten a lot of press lately. It is not an allergy. It is not a reaction that involves your immune system. However, it is a food sensitivity. So for folks that suffer from gluten intolerance or celiac disease, the consumption of gluten, which is in rye, wheat, or barley, triggers an autoimmune reaction against the villi in the small intestines. So you might be like, oh, immune reaction, that's an allergy. Now, this is a little tricky one, because even though this involves the immune system, it's not an allergy. Why? Because in the example of a food allergy, your body's immune system attacks the protein in the food, okay? In the instance of gluten intolerance or celiac disease, though your immune system is involved, your immune system is attacking your own body, okay? Your immune system is working against the villi in your small intestine and not on the protein, not on gluten itself, okay? So that's the distinction there. Your immune system needs to be attacking the protein in the food, creating, a histamine reaction. That is what is characteristic of an allergy. All right, so gluten intolerance or celiac disease, food sensitivity, not an allergy. Very important to remember. Nitrogen balance. In order to achieve nitrogen balance in your body, your nitrogen intake has to equal your nitrogen loss. This allows you to maintain body protein and weight. For someone with negative nitrogen balance, they are losing more nitrogen than they're consuming. This would occur if somebody has an illness, an injury, or decreased consumption of nitrogen. Then you have positive nitrogen balance, which is when more nitrogen is consumed than lost. You might see this, particularly in teenagers that are going through high periods of growth, if women are pregnant, or if somebody is weight training. And then these are some examples. So in the first example, this person, appears pretty healthy. Nitrogen output and input seem pretty equal. For the gentleman in the middle, he is ill or injured, he's in the hospital, he's probably not taking in a lot of nitrogen, but because his body's injured, it's outputting a lot of nitrogen. And then for the woman on the right, she's pregnant, so she has a lot of growth happening in her body. So she's taking in a lot of nitrogen, but not losing very much because the nitrogen that she's taking in is being put toward, growing her own body and the tissues of her pregnancy. So the RDA, recommended daily allowance for protein. The RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight for adults. Now, of course, this is metric, so it's not the easiest to calculate. You'd have to first calculate your weight in pounds and convert that to kilograms. Excuse me. The example here has a 154-pound adult, which equals 70 kilograms, which would convert to about 56 grams of protein per day. The average consumption for the average American with the average Western diet is about 70 grams of protein per day. So really, without even trying, the vast majority of people get more than enough protein from their daily diet. There are higher protein needs, again, for high periods of growth, so that 8.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is for the average adult. There are higher recommended daily allowances for infants during pregnancy and lactation, after injury, and in endurance athletes. An example of this is for pregnant and lactating women. It's estimated that they should add about 25 grams of protein a day. Protein intake in athletes. Protein supplements. I'm not going to read through all of this because it would be a lot to read off the slide. It is in your text. I would encourage you, if you are interested in learning more about protein supplements or maybe take them yourself, please take the time to read what they say about protein supplements in your text. It is really interesting. And protein supplements are something that I think a lot of people take without really thinking too much about them or reading too much about them. But it's really important to educate yourself because they can be really dangerous and have all kinds of adverse health effects. Protein dietary recommendations. The acceptable macronutrient distribution range for protein is 10 to 35% of total calories. The dietary guidelines for 2010 recommended that we choose a variety of protein foods, including seafood, lean meat and poultry, eggs, beans, soy products, and unsalted nuts and seeds. Protein quality. High quality or complete dietary proteins contain all the amino acids to meet body's needs, are more easily digested, and are typically found in animal proteins and soy. Quinoa is an example of a complete protein. Quinoa is a plant protein, so typically complete proteins are animal proteins, but quinoa is one of those rare plant proteins that is complete. It contains all of the essential amino acids that your body needs. Incomplete proteins are lower in one or more amino acids, and most plant proteins fall in the incomplete category. So often complementary proteins are used to make sure that you get enough of each amino acid. So here's an example: rice and beans, a very popular combination in diets across the world. A lot of folks consume rice and beans together, and it makes a lot of sense, especially from a scientific standpoint. So in this example, we're looking at 3 different amino acids, methionine, cysteine, and lysine. That's what those little abbreviations mean. So rice is high in methionine and cysteine, but low in lysine, whereas beans are low in methionine and cysteine, but high in lysine. So when you eat them together in combination with one another, you're able to get the full amount of all 3 of those amino acids, whereas if you just ate rice or just ate beans, you would miss out on some of those essential amino acids. So what should you eat? All of this can be boiled down into 3 major recommendations. Get protein without too much saturated fat. Try to eat both animal and plant proteins. And when in doubt, go with beans. They're really inexpensive, really, really good for you. Contain, a lot of protein. Can be, shelf stable. Overall, beans are a pretty great option when you look at the amount of nutritional value that they have. Vegetarian diets. Reasons to be vegetarian. I mean, this is just a list of 5 of them. There's a million reasons. Everybody has their own reason, but some popular ones are limited land and or resources. Raising animals for food takes a lot of land, takes a lot of water, a lot of resources, and if a society doesn't have those, then they may be limited to only growing plant foods, thus leading them to be vegetarian. Maybe somebody's health, their religion, their personal ethics, or their environmental concerns can all be reasons. Benefits to a vegetarian diet: it's lower in cost and healthier, in that it doesn't contain a lot of high saturated fats that you would get from animal foods. The risks of being vegetarian are deficiencies, typically amino acids, certain minerals, and B vitamin deficiencies can be seen with vegetarian diets. There's several different types of vegetarian diets. These are the 5 that you'll be required to know for this class. Excuse me. First, we have semi-vegetarian. A semi-vegetarian is somebody that excludes red meat, but may include fish and poultry, as well as dairy products and eggs. Next, we have a pescatarian. A pescatarian excludes all animal flesh except fish. Then a lacto-ovo-vegetarian excludes all animal flesh, but includes eggs and dairy products. A lacto-vegetarian excludes everything except for dairy products. They do consume dairy products. And vegans are the strictest in their diets, and they exclude all food of animal origin. And then this table can be found in your text, Meeting Dietary Needs with a Vegan Diet. It's table 6.2. And the text is probably pretty small for you here, but like I said, you can check in your book some of the nutrients that are commonly at risk for deficiency in somebody who practices a vegan diet. Protein, vitamin B12, calcium, vitamin D, iron, zinc, iodine, and omega-3 fatty acids are typically limited in a vegan diet. So the table gives some examples of plant-based foods where somebody who's vegan can obtain all of those nutrients. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And that's the last slide. So that's all I have for today. I hope you guys learned a lot about proteins. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message or bring your questions to the lab on Thursday. I'll see you guys later. Bye.